Author and speaker Dr. Wayne Dyer has transformed the lives of millions of people.
Self-realization means that we have been consciously connected with our source of being.
With more than 55 million books published in over 48 languages, his message touches all generations.
When you trust in yourself, you're trusting in the same wisdom that created you.
Join Dr. Dyer for an exhilarating exploration of the power of intention, the force that provides each one of us with infinite potential next.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wow, wow, what a beautiful place. So nice to be here, the Majestic Theater in Boston. The subject of this special that I would like to present to the world is called the power of intention. The word intention, usually when we use this word, it has sort of a connotation meaning nobody's going to get in the way. I intend for something to happen. I'm going to make this work no matter what. Regardless of whatever opposition I encounter, I intend to make it happen. It's like being a pit bull who's got a hold of a tire. Have you ever seen that? And they're just not going to let go. I'm going to have this pit bull attitude that I'm going to make something happen. That's what intention is. I'd like to offer here to you something that may change the way you look at things completely in terms of this idea of intention. Rather than thinking of intention as something that you are going to do, because the implication behind that is that this is the ego. This is the ego at work, and the part of me that says, I am going to make it happen. I've come to a place in my life now at the age of 63 where I finally realized that I don't write the books, that there's an energy that is working through me, whether you call it source or God or spirit. It doesn't make any difference what you call it. But this energy that is working builds all the bridges and writes all the books and delivers all the speeches. When I was standing back there waiting for the introduction to come out and to begin this program, the words were running through my mind from something I read years ago in A Course in Miracles. It said, if you knew who walked beside you at all times on this path that you have chosen, you could never experience fear or doubt again. If you had this knowing that there was a source, that there was something that was available to you that is responsible for all of it. And in the writing of The Power of Intention, I remember sitting down to start this book on a specific day, happened to have been Pearl Harbor Day, December the 7th. And I sat down and I put my left hand on the table and I just surrendered and I let go and I allowed the words to flow through my heart and onto the page. And I don't write with a computer. I don't have one. Can't afford it. I have 8 children and they all need one for some reason. And I don't have, you know, all of the fancy kinds of, I don't even have a typewriter. I just allow the words to come through me onto the page. And as I was sitting there and allowing this to happen, I began to realize that there was something greater going on here. And as the days went by and as I wrote each day, getting up early in the morning, and I did this years and years ago when I first started speaking. I used to speak with notes and have everything all very carefully written out and so on. And there came a time when I could no longer do that. I just had to speak from my heart, which is exactly what I'm doing here with you today in this program. And when you surrender to this, when you begin to allow this force in the universe to work through you, you begin to realize that everything that shows up here in this world shows up from a source, from a place, from an energy, from a field, whatever you want to call it, and that we and these sort of piddly little egos of ours that believe that we're so important, and whether I get it done right or whether I don't, or whether I get it done on time, or whether he does it or she does it or whatever, all of these details become almost something that occupy too much of the energy of our lives. And when you learn to surrender and to let go and to realize that intention isn't necessarily something that I do, but something that I connect to. And I'd like to share with you here at the opening a couple of observations, a couple of quotes that I came across as I was preparing to write this book. The first of these quotes is from a person who's been a very powerful and important influence in my life. His name was Carlos Castaneda. And Castaneda, particularly in his later books, in his book, The Fire from Within and The Power of Silence and The Active Side of Infinity, he spoke about intention not as something that we do, but as something that we connect to. I included this particular observation of Castaneda's in the writing of The Power of Intention because it was this particular quote that really inspired me to write this book and to produce this program and to be here with you today. And as like everything else in my life, I almost feel as if I'm no longer the one in charge. I don't even know how it was handed to me. Somebody just, and when I read the words, I had them laminated and I wrote them out and I carried them around with me and ultimately knew I was going to write a book about them, about this idea, and I was going to produce a program about it. And here's what the quote says. In the universe, there is an unmeasurable, indescribable force which those who live of the source, in quotes, of the source, and of the source means sorcerer. Now, not sorcerer in the word, when we think of sorcerer, we think of witches and incantations and all kinds of hocus pocus and so on. That's not what the word sorcerer means. It means of the source, those who live of the source. In the universe, there is an unmeasurable and indescribable force which those who live of the source call intention. And that absolutely everything that exists in the entire cosmos is attached to intent by a connecting link. And then he goes on to say, sorcerers are not only concerned with understanding and explaining that connecting link, but they are especially concerned with cleansing it of the numbing effects brought about by all of the concerns of living at ordinary levels of consciousness. Very important and powerful words to consider. Think of it like this, that everything in this universe was intended here, including you, including every mosquito and every palm tree and every avocado and all of the Rocky Mountains and the oceans, that everything that shows up in the material world emanates from a source. And this source can be thought of as that which intends things into the material world. And the question here today isn't whether or not you are going to be connected to it, because you couldn't be listening to this program. You couldn't be processing what I'm saying here if you weren't connected to this field. This field beats your heart. This field of energy grows your fingernails and grows everybody else's fingernails. I used to say it grows your hair, but I've become a little suspicious of that, you know. But it animates all life. Now, this is one observation, that intention is what I'd like you to think of when I think about the power of intention. Intention isn't about whether you're going to connect to it. You're already connected to it. The question is, how rusty, how corroded, how dirty is the link between you and this field of intention? And sorcerers are those who are concerned with cleansing this connecting link so that you become more and more in rapport with, or in harmony with, this field of intention. And the more you're in harmony with this field of intention, the more you are able to do all that this field of intention is able to do. You are able to create miracles. You are able to heal yourself. You are able to attract into your life the abundance that has been missing. You are able to find the right people and have them show up exactly on time, because that's how the universal source from which all things and all people originated, that's how it works. And what we're going to be doing here today in this program is looking at how to get that link back to intention, and to not only be connected to it, but to always be ready to keep that connecting link clean, uncorroded. I came across another quote. Now, Castaneda is considered by many to be a metaphysician, if you will, an anthropologist who got into the world of sorcery and higher consciousness through what we call like spiritual literature and so on. There's another man whose observations I came across that I want to share with you. And his name is Max Planck. Now, you may be saying, who is Max Planck? Max Planck was given the Nobel Prize in Physics many years ago in Stockholm for his work on the atom. He, along with Einstein, was considered to be one of the greatest scientific minds on the planet. Now, these are the people who need hardcore data. They don't want to hear about hocus pocus and sorcerers and connecting to intention and all of these kind of things. It has to be something they can measure, they can see. These are the people who are what we call operating out of the left brain. And that is not in any way a criticism. It's something that allows us to make great scientific explorations and advances, of course, as people. And the study of the atom is something that can be used not only to make atomic bombs, but it can also be used to power all of the needs that we have on the planet for energy if it were put into the proper context. So here's what Max Planck had to say. As he accepted the Nobel Prize, these were his words. As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you, as the result of my research about atoms, this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume, now listen to a greatest scientist on the planet, we must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. Now, that is very, very powerful evidence. One of the things that really intrigues me is this idea, and I heard it many, many years ago. I'm not even sure of the original source where I heard it, but it goes like this. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Albert Einstein once observed that you have the most fundamental and major decision that you have to make in your life is this. Do I live in a friendly or a hostile universe? Which is it? Is it a universe that is filled with hostility and anger and people wanting to hate each other and people wanting to kill each other? Is that what you see? Because when you see the world that way, that's exactly what you will create for yourself in your life. This is from great scientific minds. And the interesting thing is that this is not just a clever play on words, that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. It's actually a very scientific thing, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. I'd like you to imagine the following scene. You're in your house. You've got your car keys in your hand. The lights go out. Power failure. You can't see a thing. You stumble around in your living room and you drop your keys. And you look around for a moment and you realize that you're never going to find them in the dark. But you look outside and you notice that the street lights are on. So in your mind, a light bulb goes off. I'm not going to sit around here in the dark and grope around looking for my keys when there's a light on outside. I'm going to go out here under the street light and I'm going to look for my keys. Why are you laughing? This makes a lot of sense. So you're out here and you're groping around and you're looking for your keys and you're looking and your neighbor comes along and says, "What happened, Wayne?" "Well, I dropped my keys." "Oh, I'll help you look for them." And the two of us are now down here looking for our keys and looking. Finally, he says to me, "Excuse me, but where did you drop your keys?" "Well, I dropped them in the house." He said, "You mean to tell me that you dropped your keys in the house and you're looking for them out here in the street light? Doesn't make any sense." And I said, "Well, it doesn't make any sense to grope around in the dark when there's light out here." Now you laugh and you think how silly that is, but isn't that exactly what we do when we have a problem, a difficulty, a struggle that is located inside and we're looking for the solution outside? Someplace outside of ourselves. It would be like going to the doctor and telling him all of your symptoms, and the doctor says, "Oh boy, you've got a lot of symptoms." And he starts writing out prescriptions. You need a prescription for this symptom, you need a prescription for that symptom, and finally he gets this 4 or 5, and you go to walk out, and you say, "Well, I'd like my prescriptions." He said, "No, I'll give this one to your mother-in-law, and I'll give this one to your neighbor, and I'll give this one to your daughter, and I'll give this one to your father." I mean, you're the one with the struggles and with the difficulties, and expecting somebody else to change or something outside of you to get better in order for you to make your life work at this level that I'm calling intention is something you have to really take a hard look at. It's in here. We have to see, the question isn't whether I'm connected to this field of intention. The question is, how ready am I to keep that connecting link absolutely corrosion-free? And I used to ask the question many years ago, from studying philosophy and teaching it for many years, who am I? Who am I? I'm pretty much at peace with that now. I really think that who I am is a piece of the divine source, disguised as an author and a father and a writer and someone who delivers these kinds of talks and so on. It's all a disguise. I remember when someone asked Mother Teresa, "What do you do every day in the streets of Calcutta?" She had a wonderful, profound answer. She said, "Every day I see Jesus Christ in all of his distressing disguises. I see the unfolding of Source, the unfolding of God, the unfolding of Spirit in all that I encounter." And I see it in myself as well. And I see that and know that. That's not the question that bugged me the most. The one that puzzled me the most is, where did I come from? Where did I come from? You ever ask yourself that question? I used to ponder that. I could remember I lived in a series of foster homes for a while when I was a young boy, until I was about 9. And I lay out in Mount Clemens, Michigan, I would lay out on the grass and I would look up and I'd see these endless stars. There was an apple orchard out there. And I could just lie there on my back and I'd just look up and I'd say, where did I come from? Where did I come from? And it's not about reincarnation. I always liked Eleanor Roosevelt's response when they asked her if she believed in reincarnation. She said, "I don't think it would be any more bizarre for me to show up in another lifetime than it was for me to show up in this one." Which always kind of made sense to me. You know? It's hard to figure all of this out. But where did I come from? Where did I come from? So you ask yourself this perplexing question, where did I come from? And most of us, when we think about that question, we come up with an answer. And the answer is, as hard as it is for us to even imagine, our parents did it. It's a tough one. But in one blissful moment, one drop of human protoplasm in some mysterious way collided with another, and life began in this microscopic dot. Now, I can remember years ago, we had 4 children in 7 years. And my teenage daughter, Stephanie, at that time, she had to take on a lot of the helping responsibilities around the house when these babies just kept showing up. And we found out that we were going to have another child. Another mysterious thing happened, and another child was on its way. And my wife and I flipped a coin to decide who would tell Stephanie. And I lost. So I cornered her one day when she was in a really good mood. And I said, honey, you're not going to believe this, but we're going to have another baby. Oh, that's great. And her hands went. Instant pose. This is it. This foot here, this one out here. That's terrific. I said, well, it really is. I said, and you should probably be glad that we didn't have the same attitude that you have when we found out about you. She said, yes, but how do you think it feels? I said, well, why don't you tell me? She said, no, Dad, how do you think it feels to be the only kid in junior high school who has parents who like to do it? And I said, Steph, I know this is going to be hard for you to accept, but Grandma and Grandpa do it. That is just sick. That's all I got. Off, just storming out of there. Huh? So when we think about where we come from, that sort of is the place that we get to in our hearts. But just go back to that moment for a second and understand that, remember what I said earlier, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Just keep that idea in mind. Because if you go back to the time of your absolute beginning into the material world, you know that there was a microscopic dot. And this microscopic dot included everything that you needed for this physical journey. And you can't even see it with a microscope. It's just too mysterious and too mystical to even contemplate, isn't it? That something as tiny as you could get 1,000,000 of them on the head of a pin contains everything that you needed for this physical journey. Everything. Your birth was in there. The shape of your eye is in there. Your height is in there. The color of your skin is in there. I hold a hair up on the pillow and I say, and I've had this experience several million times. What held it in yesterday? You know. And you must ask that question, like, what held them up yesterday, don't you? Or why was it black yesterday and it's gray today? Where did that one come from, or whatever? And all of these changes are in this microscopic dot. So what I'd like to do just for a few seconds here is to go back to take the microscopic dot that is your beginnings, in which there's a future pull that is created every face and every body and everything in here and everyone out there watching today in that one instant miraculous moment. Everything that you needed for this physical journey was in there. Too hard to comprehend, you just accept it. So now we take the dot and we look at the dot and we say, let's find the origin of the dot that began me. And you put it under a microscope and you turn up the magnification, and what you see as you turn up this magnification is you see molecules. And inside of those molecules are mostly particles, and these particles are all flitting about, and there's mostly just empty spaces in there. And you take one of these particles out, and we call them atoms. And you put this atom, looking for your source, looking for where you began, and you put it under another atomic microscope, turn up the magnification even stronger, and what do you discover as you turn up the magnification? You discover that it's just more empty spaces and more particles with new names. Protons, electrons, neutrons, croutons, whatever you want to call them, right? We memorized them in junior high school, right? So you take one of these electrons, and you're just looking for your source. Where did I come from? You turn up the magnification on this electron microscope, and what do you see? More spaces and more particles, all flitting about a dance, this huge dance. And you take one of those and you turn up the magnification, and what you have are new particles with new names called quarks. We're now looking at quantum physics, the study of the behavior of matter at the tiniest, tiniest, tiniest levels. And we're just looking for our source. So finally, we take one of those quarks, and these quarks are really weird. My friend Deepak Chopra has often said to me, Wayne, he said, quantum physics is not only stranger than you think it is, it's stranger than you can think. Because you take a tiny little subatomic particle and observe it, and the fact is that the nature of your observing changes what you're observing. If you look at it in a certain way, it becomes one thing. If you turn away, it becomes something else. It's truly a scientific fact that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And now you take this tiny little subatomic particle, and you take it and you put it in a particle accelerator, and you rev up the speed of these things and collide them at 250,000 miles per hour. You collide them, you open up the particle accelerator looking for your source, and guess what's in there? Nothing. No thing. That the dot that began you originated from a field of energy that has no boundaries, no beginnings, no ends. It's infinite. It's an infinite potential. And the question that I have for you is, if you can get this, that you didn't begin with that particle because particles themselves do not create more particles. St. Paul put it this way in the New Testament, that which is seen hath not come from that which doth appear. They talked a little strange in those days, all right? What that means is that everything that we see in the material world doesn't originate in the material world. It's the spirit that gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. If the shape of your eye can be in an energy field that has no boundaries, no form, no materialness to it, why not the shape of your life? Why not everything that you are destined to become? Why can't that be a part of this energy field as well? That you showed up here from a field that I call intention. And that beautiful globe that is here to my left, to your right, is what I am going to call, for the rest of this program, I am going to call this the source from which we all originated. That every particle that shows up on this planet, and that's what Max Planck said, and that's what Carlos Castaneda said, and that's what every metaphysician said, that's what all of the great spiritual teachings on this planet say, that our source is spirit. It is something other than the physical. And if you had a set of magical binoculars, and you could look at that field, what I'm going to describe in this program is what that field would look like. And my suggestion to you here is this, that you are going to, if you want to understand intention and the power of intention, it means suspending your ego, the part of you that believes that you are separate from this source, because that's where all of our problems originated, all of our struggles, even our illnesses. This is a source of well-being. Everything that emanates from this source emanates from a field of well-being. It looks like something. It sounds like something. One of the things that it sounds like, I took from one of the great spiritual traditions in the universe. It's from the Bhagavad Gita, what is called the Hindu holy book, the Song of the Lord. But you can look in any spiritual tradition, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Zoroastrianism or whatever, and basically they all say the same thing. If this source that we call God or soul or spirit, if it could speak, this is what it would sound like. And then later on, I'm going to talk to you about what it looks like. What does it look like? I am the source of all material and spiritual worlds. Everything emanates from me. That's what it sounds like. Everything emanates from me. So that means you. And that's why the words, with God all things are possible, means that when you find in your heart a way to reconnect to this, and remember what I talked about in those opening quotes, that this field of intention is a field that is only corroded because we take on something that separates us from the source. And that is called the ego. And the ego is really nothing more than an idea that we carry around. It's the source of virtually all of our problems. The only difficulty is you can't check into a hospital. Like if you got an appendix problem, you check in, get an appendectomy. There's no place that I know of that gives egoectomies. It would be nice, but it doesn't work that way. So that what you want to do is figure out a way to get rid of this idea that who I am is separate from this. And this is your source. And when you reconnect to your source, live in harmony with your source, you are connecting to the field of intention. And when you're with this field of intention, everything that this field of intention from which all material worlds emanate, everything that it can do, you can do because you are it and it is you. The problems that we have is we've come to a place where we believe that we are separate from it. And so we start to believe that I am what I do. And I am what I have. And I am separate from everybody else. And I am my reputation. And I'm separate from what is missing in my life. But this field from which all things originate, if it's everywhere, it's got to be in you. And if it's everywhere and it has to be in you, it has to also be in everything that you perceive to be missing from your life. It has to be in that too, because there's no place that it's not. And if there's no place that it's not, you literally are already connected to everything that you would like to attract into your life. What keeps you from doing it is your belief that you're separate from your source. We want to reconnect to this source. People ask me the question, what about a free will? If I was intended here, and the shape of my life was intended here from this source, where does that leave me with a free will? Well, where it leaves you with a free will is this. You have a free will to decide whether or not you are going to connect or not connect to that source. That's your free will. If you make a choice, a conscious choice, to stay disconnected from it and believe that you are all of these things that I just illustrated in the ego, this field of intention doesn't know anything about non-well-being. It creates from a source of well-being. It doesn't know anything about fear, about anxiety, about worry. It just is in a constant state of creating. There's a quotation that goes like this: self-realization, which is really reconnecting to your source. Self-realization means that we have been consciously connected with our source of being. We are reconnected to this source, which I'm going to describe in detail in this program, what I believe the faces of intention look like. Once we have made this connection, then absolutely nothing can go wrong. That's from Swami Paramananda. Nothing can go wrong when you reconnect to source. All of our struggles, all of our illnesses, all of the scarcities in our life, all of the problems we have in our relationships, all of this stuff came about because we disconnected ourselves from a field of intention that is nothing but just well-being at work. It only wants you to be in a state of happiness. I said in a book that I wrote many years ago called Gifts from Icus, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. You're not going to find it in something outside of you. It is, and it's like when you understand this and get this, Connecting to intention means something that's very powerful to you. There's an observation that I came across in the writing of The Power of Intention by a man who gave a lecture, I'm not sure the exact year, but it was in the early 1900s. His name was Thomas Troward. And he gave a series of lectures on mental science at Edinburgh in Scotland, called the Edinburgh and Dorey Lectures. And one of those observations, one of those quotations was this. I really love this. He said, "The law of flotation was not discovered by the contemplation of the sinking of things." Isn't that great? Imagine yourself trying to figure out, what he made an observation that before about the 15th or 16th centuries, all of the ships in the world were made out of wood. And why do you think they made ships out of wood for so many centuries? Because when you put wood in water, what happens? It floats. And our conclusion was, the law of flotation must be, you want things to float, make them out of things that float. But now we have realized that in studying the law of flotation, that it has nothing to do with what the material is made out. It has to do with the amount of water that is being displaced. So now all the ships of the world are made out of stuff that doesn't float, and yet they float. We're celebrating now, at this time in our history, the 100-year anniversary of Orville and Wilbur Wright over in Dayton, Ohio. Imagine the law of flight being discovered by someone, by two brothers, contemplating the staying on the ground of things. So what we want to do is figure out a way to reconnect ourselves to surrounding ourselves with this idea that we are already connected to everything that we need for everything in our life. We've just separated ourselves by believing that we're something that we're not. In a book that I wrote a few years back called 10 Secrets for Success and Inner Peace, which was part of a PBS special, one of those secrets is called treasuring your divinity. Treasuring your divinity. And I came across this observation, and I was writing some notes on what I'm just talking about, on contemplating things. Listen to these words. We know that by the very nature of the creative process, which is what intention is about, learning to create the life that you want, the world that you want, the people that you want, the excitement that you want, the health that you want, everything. We know that by the very nature of the creative process that we are one with this originating spirit. And therefore, we are also one with all of its principles. Whatever this is like, whatever it sounds like, whatever it thinks like, whatever it looks like, we are one with it. And consequently, we are one with its infinite personality. We are not here as human beings having spiritual experiences. We are all spiritual beings having human experiences. All of us. We are all infinite. And therefore, our contemplation of this source, as the power which we want, gives us the ability to use that power. And the way that we use this process is to contemplate ourselves as surrounded by the conditions which we want to produce. Keep that in mind. Underline that. Surround yourself internally with the conditions, contemplate them, which you want to produce. What is it you want to produce in your life? What do you intend to create for yourself? It's not your ego that's going to do it. It's your free will to reconnect to this, which is the source of everything. You're going to be, by the end of this program, you're going to be in rapport with, in harmony with this. If you call my cell phone, pick up the phone. I'm not going to give that number, but if you were to call this number, this is what you would get as a message from me. Hi, this is Wayne Dyer that you've reached, and I want to feel good. If your call is designed to do anything other than that, you have reached the wrong number, and I urge you to call Dr. Phil. But feeling good is perhaps the most important thing that I can talk to you about here in cleaning up this link. If you open up the Torah, this ancient spiritual text, the Old Testament, and go to the very opening lines, Genesis 1:1, it says, what? In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Pretty simple. God is infinite. Out of this source came all the material worlds. And then if you read down 31 lines later, it says, and all that God created was good. So good and God are synonymous, aren't they? Good and God, just an O, just one extra O. So that when you say, I want to feel good, as you'll see as this program unfolds, you're really saying, in a way, I want to feel God. I want to feel whatever this beautiful source of all, this divine mind, this source of all things, I want to feel what it feels. Now you might say to yourself, yeah, it's easy to say I want to feel good, but how can I feel good when so much around me is bad? How can I feel good if my sister-in-law has cancer? And how can I feel good if I know that over on the other side of this planet there are people who are starving to death? And how can I feel good if there are people who are poor and I have money, and there are people who are starving? And how can I feel good when my children act in the way that they act? Or how can I feel good? And I suggest to you that when you say I want to feel good, what you're saying is I want to feel God. I want to feel this. I want to connect here. And I want to offer this to you as a very important and powerful piece of advice that came to me years ago. You cannot get sick enough to heal one person on this planet. And you cannot get poor enough to make one person wealthy on this planet. And you cannot get confused enough to unconfuse one person on this planet. No amount of your feeling bad, when you say feeling bad, what you do is you lose your connection to Source. And when you lose your connection to Source, what happens is you create something called resistance. I can't do this. It's not possible. I don't deserve it. It's just not something that I can do. And when you create this kind of resistance, you have emotions. And these emotions become sadness, fear, worry, anxiety. And what I'd like to offer you is a way for you to use these emotions that you are experiencing at any time in your life and use them as a system, as a barometer, as a guidance system to say to yourself, what kinds of thoughts am I having that are keeping me from being in rapport with this field of intention? And at any moment that you're not feeling good, you are attracting exactly the opposite of what it is that you would like to attract into your life. You are using this as a way to keep yourself from feeling God or feeling good. If you are listening to the news, and the news is filled with all of the reasons why you should be depressed, and it's not an accident that then they are sponsored by all of the reasons why you should take these narcotics or these pills or whatever it is in order to get over. So here's some depression, and wait a minute, we'll be right back. Here's a way out of it, okay? I saw a commercial the other day. I don't even know what it was for. Some guy gets up in the morning, and he's going out to get clams. And he's going out clamming in the morning, and he's successful at getting the clams. He walks off, and he's got his clams. And I think, and then they say, call your doctor to see if you need some of this clam-finding miracle drug. There's a drug out there that'll help you find clams if this happens to be one of your problems. All right? And there's something out there, and now we're being told to call our doctors. Do I need the orange pill, the green pill, the purple pill? Do I need this one? I saw so-and-so reading it, and she was skating on the ice, and I want to skate on the ice and do it. And it's like it's an endless progression of this. It's one of the reasons that I put so much of my energy into public television. Because when I watch the evening news, when I watch Jim Lehrer on the evening news on PBS, which is the only news that I watch, I don't get bombarded with all of the reasons why, and I also get sort of either side of this thing. I don't just get a one-sided view of it. And it's like, it's an energy system. I'd like to say to you here that my idea about connecting to intention has certain obstacles to getting there. And I just want to very briefly go through what those obstacles are and then move into what it is that you need to do to understand what this field looks like and what you can do to stay connected to it. Keeping in mind these words, I want to feel good. I know my beautiful daughter, who will be singing in a little while, Sky, she was working on a music project. And she had come to me and she said, she was going to school at the University of Miami. And she said, Dad, would you mind if I dropped out of school? And since I have been a person who has never, ever listened to any advice that adults ever gave me throughout my life about what I should do with my life, because I believe it's something that you have to own yourself, I said, why? And she said, well, I want to sing. I've always just wanted to sing. It's the only thing that's in my heart is singing. And what I've discovered, she said, is that I can't sit in classrooms anymore in my junior year and be told how to sing by people who are not singing. And she said, I also don't want to study theory any longer. I want to sing. I just feel it in my heart. I said, that's great. I said, I'd like to take you with me when I talk all over the country, all over the world. And I'd like you to sing for me, because I'm always so proud to have her on stage with me, as you'll see why shortly. And I said to her, I said, honey, but what you got to do is perhaps put together a project, perhaps put together a CD, get some way that you can come out and sing at the talks and include on this some of the music that is relevant to what I speak about. And she said, okay. And I was over on Maui and I was writing. And she called me, she said, Dad, the problem is that the musicians that I need to be able to do this are not available. And you can't get them. And I said, Sky, you've got to contemplate yourself as surrounded by the conditions which you wish to produce. Don't think about the musicians as not being available. Contemplate yourself surrounded by the musicians, and you'll see that when you reconnect to this source will provide. It always does. It's an unfailing system. It's fail-safe. She said, all right, Dad the dork, you know. She called me back the next day. She said, you're not going to believe this, Dad. I did what you said last night, and all the musicians are available. I just can't believe it. She said, they called the ones that I wanted, especially they had a cancellation on something. She said, the only problem is that the studios that I need in order to be able to record it are unavailable. There's no studios available in any place in South Florida, and I want to get this in, and I had given her a deadline of like 4 days to get this done, an entire CD. So she called me back and she said, how do I get a studio? I said, Sky, contemplate yourself as surrounded by the conditions which you wish to produce. The law of flotation was not discovered. All right, I got it with the flotation, okay? She called me back the next morning. She said, Dad, it's a miracle. She said the studios had a cancellation, and the studio that I really need and the musicians, they're all available. I can put the whole thing together. It's so exciting. This stuff really works. I said, of course it does. She said, the only problem is that it costs quite a bit of money to pay these musicians and to have the studio time. I said, Sky, honey, you've got to contemplate yourself as surrounded by the conditions which you want to produce. She said, that's why I'm calling you. And I said, but honey, I want to feel good. She said, maybe you should call Dr. Phil. She said, and this will make you feel good, because you will be contemplating yourself as surrounded by a daughter who is so... She used it all right back on me. And she did it, and she got it done, and she was able to produce it. And, you know, it sounds like a silly little example, but it's like the obstacles that we have to creating what we want very often are in the ways that we perceive ourselves as disconnected here. And every thought that you have that says, I can't do it, is resistance to connecting to source. And every thought that you have that says, it's never worked before, that's resistance to connecting to this source, to what is being, what I call vibrating to source energy, getting back to having your desires, what you want to create in vibrational harmony with this highest energy in the universe. The obstacles that we have, most of us are, there's three of them. The major one is the ego, which I talked about earlier. You have to learn to stop being offended. There are people out there who are going through life looking for occasions to be offended, and you very seldom will find yourself disappointed. And if you don't like the way somebody's dressed, that's a way to be offended. If you don't like the language that they use, one of the things I do is I run in hallways when I'm traveling on the road, because I like to do my running every day, but I don't like to, if it's very cold or very hot, I don't like to have to carry a lot. So I just carry a pair of shorts, and I run up and down the hallway like this. I run here, and I run up and down, and I get an hour of running out there in the hallways of hotels. Now, there are people behind the doors very often who don't anticipate a sweaty man running on the hallway. And there are times when the doors will open and I'll be running and I'll hear someone walk by. What is that guy doing? What's wrong with him? Doesn't he know that there's a track? This isn't the place. And he's using my experience out here as a reason to be offended. And he's still on the way down. He's yelling at his wife about the fact that I shouldn't be there. Oftentimes goes home, kicks the cat, whatever it is, because... But one day I was running, and there's a different view of it as well. It's very interesting. Because I was running in the hallway one time, and the door opened, and a woman had to be 92, 93 years old. So it was in Little Rock, Arkansas. And she opened up the door, and I was running right past her. She had a little walker. She said, "Young man." I immediately loved this lady. Huh? She said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "Well, ma'am," I said, and I stopped. I was running in place. I said, "I just like to get my heart rate going up there. It's really good. I didn't want to go outside because it's very hot out there today." She said, "You got that much energy this time of the morning to be out there running?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Why don't you come on into this room with me for a little while?" Now, there's a woman who had a great sense of humor. With the same, she wasn't looking for an occasion to be offended. How many times do you find yourself doing that? Or stopping yourself from feeling superior, or from needing to be right, or from needing to win, or from needing more, or to achieve, or to be concerned with your reputation. All of these have nothing to do with source energy. All of that has to do with this identity that you've taken on that says, I am, all of these accomplishments are what I do. That's one. The second of these obstacles is what I call the energy of your life. Everything in the universe has energy. Everything. That's why I promote a book so powerfully called Power versus Force by David Hawkins, a medical doctor out in Sedona, Arizona, where he talks about the thoughts that we have and how you can use kinesthesiology. You can just use muscle tests to determine whether something works or doesn't work for you, and whether it's strong or not. And every thought that you have, and he has compartmentalized all of these different thoughts. And it's like he even suggested that the music that we listen to has energy in it. The photographs that we have hanging in our home, the prayers that we have, and the television shows that we watch. There is very low energy out there. The average child in America has already seen 12,000 murders, simulated murders, in his living room on cable and commercial television before his 14th birthday. Imagine, imagine. 12,000 simulated murders. You never see that on public television. That's why I'm here doing this for public television. Because it's a place where you are not allowed to send that kind of energy out. So my son, I was over on Maui, and we were there for the summer, and all of a sudden I hear this crazy music playing throughout the whole place. And it's some kind of gangster thing and wanting to kill people and loud swearing and all of this. I said, "Sands, what is this? What are you listening to?" He said, "Dad, it's really cool, man. This is rap. This is really, it's like, 16, I said, "Go get the CD." And this is something that I read in Power versus Force. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Go get the CD." Now, he's a big, strong, 16-year-old strapping kid, 6 foot tall, very muscular, a lot of testosterone. And so he brings the CD in, and he said, "What do you want me to do with this?" I said, "Well, set it on the table and take that banana." And I had some bananas there. I said, "Take that organic banana, place it next to your heart, put your arm out, and what I'd like you to do is resist me as hard as you can with that banana next to your heart." And he did, and I put 2 fingers on, I couldn't budge his arm. I said, "Now take that CD and put that next to your heart." He took the CD with the energy in it. As hard as this is to imagine for yourself, you can try this in your own work. And he held that next to him, and he became powerless to my 2 fingers pushing down on his arm. The energy weakened him. The energy of the foods that we eat, the shows that we watch, the people that we surround ourselves with. Even the thing, you know, most of you know that I'm a camel. And a camel is an animal that starts out every morning on his knees, and he goes to bed every night on his knees, and he can go 24 hours without a drink. And that's something that I do every day. I go 24 hours without a drink. And it isn't because I labeled myself as an alcoholic or anything like that. I was told by a very powerful and important teacher that if you want to reach the levels that I would like you to be able to understand, where you can literally do a somersault into the inconceivable and see yourself as capable of attracting and healing and being able to create abundance, if you want to be able to be all that you can be, he said you've got to stop putting substances into your body that are deteriorating the body and deleterious to the health of your body. And he said alcohol just happens to be one of those things. So I don't take a particular moral position on it. I did it because I didn't want that energy into my life. So look at the energy of your life, the places that you accumulate, the friends that you have, the people that find fault with what you're doing. Look at all of the way, even a simple little thing like feng shui, which is a Chinese form of how you arrange the furniture in your, it's so cool. But I've got a lady who works with me over in Maui, and every time I go away, she'll come back and she'll have this thing moved over here and this thing over there, and I'll say, but you know, I like this here. This is where I shave. No. The feng shui of that isn't quite right, and you don't want to have a red next to you. I just listen to her. My place is one of the most pleasant and beautiful places. Of course, having it on the ocean has a lot to do with it as well. But I believe that energy is in everything. Change the energy of your life and reconnect to the energy of spirit. Spiritual energy is healing energy. Spiritual energy, as you'll see, is the energy of abundance.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
So now, the third thing is, as an obstacle, we looked at ego, we've looked at our energy, and also the way that we talk to ourselves. How do you talk to yourself? If you think, here's one of my favorite quotes, the creative source in your life, here it is right here, this creative source. This source reacts to your belief in shortages with a fulfillment of your belief. If you believe there's shortages out there and you can't attract them into your life, now this is a source that is unlimited abundance. It just is a constant state of creating. It's always creating, okay? So it doesn't know anything about shortages. If you come to this source with a belief that there are shortages in terms of your life, it will fulfill your belief. If you believe that you can't be healed, that it's just impossible for you to be healed, if you believe you can't be happy, if you believe that you have to be miserable, if you believe that you can't attract the right person, if you've got something that you want to fund, some project that you want to fund, and you can't get it funded, and you come to this source with a belief in shortages, it will fulfill your belief. It only knows how to be. Remember what I said earlier, you are at one with this, and you are also at one with all of its principles. And you have to contemplate yourself as connected to, in harmony with, in rapport with this. It's like there's a game that's been on television for years. It's called the match game. And this match game is it's a fun little game to watch because you get people who you really think know each other, and they say something and they try to match it up. You're always you want to get into a match game yourself. And the match game you want to be into is one in which you match up with this source. You're going to always try to be matched up with that. What I'm asking you to do in this program, and in understanding intention and the power of intention, I'm asking you to see yourself at every moment of your life when you're having a thought, when things aren't working, when you're not feeling well, when the right people aren't there. You could say something to yourself. I heard people say this, you know, I tell people always, think from the end. Think from the end. So I was talking to a man one day down in where I work out in the gym, and I said to him, He's been sick. He's got nose running. He's got, you know, Snoopy's running out of his nose. He's got, it's disgusting. And I said, how long have you been sick, Marty? You will never believe this answer. He said, in 3 weeks, it'll be a month. What kind of thinking is that? I was changing plane in Dallas one time, and there was about 8 minutes to go before I had to make a connection. And the woman next to me, she said, I said, I'd really appreciate if I could just step in front of you because I'm going to make my connection. She said, you're going to have to change trains and get to another terminal. She said, there's no way that you can make your connection. She's still in Dallas. I think from the end, I see myself as already connected to that which I want to attract into my life. And if it doesn't work out for some reason, I don't use blame, I don't get anger, I just simply say to myself, this is the way it is supposed to be. And I'm at peace with it. I choose to be at peace because this is peace. You want to watch the resistance. What kind of self-talk do we have? If you think about what is missing in your life, and you talk to other people about what is missing in your life, and you share a lot with what's missing in your life. I'm missing the right person. My soulmate has never showed up, you know. I'm missing the money. I don't have them. And you talk about all the things that are missing in your life. Here's your connection to Source. Remember, you're always connected. The question is, are you ready to stop living at ordinary levels of consciousness? Are you willing to live at a spiritual level of consciousness in which you are in rapport with that which provides everything? So if you're thinking about what's missing and you go to this universal source asking to have fixed what is missing in your life, you'll have your belief in what's missing continue to be refocused for you. In the Old Testament it says, as a man thinketh, so is he. If you think about what is missing, don't be surprised if you keep attracting what's missing into your life. If you think about what always has been, then don't be surprised if what always has been is what keeps showing up in your life. Because thoughts are energy. And the thought of it's always been this way and there's nothing I can do, resistance. What emotion am I feeling? Frustration. I want to change that. What is my guidance system? I'm going to see how in harmony am I with this energy of Source, with the energy of intention. How in harmony with it am I? The source of all doesn't know anything about things being missing. There's nothing missing in this universal source. And you emanated from that. You are a piece of that. If you're always thinking about what they want for you, and there's no shortage of them, they're called relatives. I'm going to write a book someday that's going to be called Your Friends Are God's Way of Apologizing for Your Relatives. Why? Because, by the way, I gave this same talk to your relatives and they applauded even louder. Okay? Because a friend is someone before whom you can think aloud. A friend is not someone who makes demands on you and tells you what you should be doing or what you shouldn't be doing. There are very often, because we believe that we're related to people, we have talk, and then what happens with us is that we start talking to other people about what they want for us. And we despise what they want for us. We get angry at them for even wanting that for us, and then we get surprised when what they want for us keeps showing up. See, self-actualizing people, Abraham Maslow once said, the difference between self-actualizing people, the highest functioning people, and everybody else is that self-actualizing people must be what they can be. Self-actualizing people must be what they can be. What can you be? What can you be? And I'd like to suggest to you that if you look, I'm going to take a pair of magical binoculars now. And I'm going to take these binoculars and I'm just going to assume that I am now looking through these magical binoculars at my source, where I came from. The question I asked at the very beginning, where did I come from? The answer to that is, I came from a field of energy, and a particle was formed out of that field that became everything I needed for this physical journey, My birth and my death were all in there. My height, the color of my skin, the hair falling out, all of the things that are taking place in this physical body were all handled there. But they were also handled before that source hit the world of material. And when I shift and understand that what I came from, what I'm looking for here, I'm looking to see, what does it look like? What does this look like? I call these in the book, in The Power of Intention, I call them the faces of intention. The 7 faces of intention. And any time in your life when you are not in harmony with these 7 faces, you are stopping the miraculousness, the miracle, the mystical mystery that you are, that not only decided the shape of your eye before it became a particle, but decided the shape of your life as well. You came here from a field of energy that has no limits. The first of these 7 faces is called the face of creativity or creation. And I suggest to you that there's an intention, and intention is one of the chapters here. It is my intention to live my life on purpose. Here is the source. So beautiful. This is where I emanated from. And this source is always creating. And you, as a being who has emanated from that but has taken on an ego, has what I call summoning power or pulling power. You can pull from this source and be what it is, or you can have resistance to it. How much summoning power do you have? How much of this source are you able to summon? When you are on purpose and creating in your life, one of the great teachers in my life was a man named Patanjali. And he had an observation about being in spirit. The word in spirit creates a word called inspire. And Patanjali put it this way. He said, when you are inspired in spirit, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new and a great and a wonderful world. And then he said something so powerful. He said, dormant forces, like forces that you didn't think were accessible to you, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive. And you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. Those words bring tears to my eyes. They're so powerful. When you are inspired, when you are in spirit. When you're in spirit, you are creating. When you are creating, everything is working. My teacher in India one time, Nisargadatta Maharaj, said, when he was asked the question, there's wars going on in Pakistan, there's people having difficulties here, there's people dying, there's starvation. How can you say that I can heal myself, and how can you be at peace when you see all of this going around? And you know what he said to his devotee? He said, in my world, nothing ever goes wrong. What a powerful idea that is. You can't get sick enough to heal those people who are sick around you. You can't get poor enough to take care of the lack of abundance in so many people's life. The only thing you can do to help that, as I'll be talking about a little later, is to connect to this. You know, when I was 19 years old, I joined the Navy right after high school in 1958. And I was going overseas to connect to my ship after having gone to school. And I was standing at the dock boarding a ship called the USS Vega, which is a refrigerator ship, which was taking me across the Pacific Ocean in 29 days to meet the USS Ranger, an aircraft carrier, at that time the largest ship in the world, and I was assigned to it. And it was docked in a place called Yokosuka, Japan. And I took a boat, this refrigerator boat, over to Sasebo in southern Japan, got on a train, 19 years old, and was going to catch my boat 29 days later. 19-year-old kid. And as I got on the boat, never having been on such an adventure before, my Uncle Bill, who was a school teacher in Hayward, California, one of my heroes, one of the reasons why I'm here today is because of my Uncle Bill Volek. he handed me a book, and it was a collection of short stories by a man named Leo Tolstoy. He said to me, as he handed it to me, he said, read The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. And The Death of Ivan Ilyich is a story of a man very quickly who was a judge in Moscow. And he went back and forth every day to work, and he hated his work, and he hated his life, and he hated his wife. And he hated everything about what he was doing, and yet he still pursued it. And he got to the end of his life, and he was lying on his deathbed, and he looked up at his wife, who was holding his hands, and he looked into her eyes. And I was 19 when I read this, and it still gives me goose flesh. He said to her as he died, "What if my whole life has been wrong?" And I took out a pad of paper, and I wrote down my first of my 10 secrets for success in Interpace. And I started a journal at that time, and it said, "Dear Wayne, don't die with your music still in you. Don't die with your music still in you." I would suggest to you, if you are not creating, and if you wonder what your purpose is, and so many people wonder, what is my purpose? And they talk to, I don't know what my purpose is. You know what that is? Your thoughts about your purpose are your purpose trying to reconnect to you. Like if you want to quit smoking, and people say, oh, it's such a hard thing to do. Well, of course, that's resistance. And then, you know, who wants to do hard things when easy things like smoking are available? But if you, and people say, well, I've been thinking about it. I said, keep thinking about it. Just keep thinking. You want to lose weight? Keep thinking about it. Put your attention on it. Surround yourself with those kind of thoughts, because the thinking about it process is a part of your connecting to it. Eventually, you will connect to it, and you will begin to act upon what those thoughts are. But you got to start by thinking about it. And the ultimate purpose you can have in your life, I used to have a jacket that I hung on my closet door. And the jacket had all of the pockets ripped off. I took a razor blade to all the pockets, because someone had once said to me that the last jacket you wear doesn't need any pockets. So, because you're not taking anything with you in your pockets, all right? So every time I'd walk into my closet and I'd look at this tattered jacket with no pockets in it, it was a reminder, you're going to have to wear a jacket someday that doesn't need any pockets, all right? And that so what do you do with your life? Your life is like a parenthesis in eternity. You show up from an infinite source. You materialize. You're a particle. Everything you needed for this life is in it. And then you close parentheses. What can you do with your life? You can't take anything with you. You came from nowhere, N-O-W-H-E-R-E. You show up in now here, N-O-W-H-E-R-E. It's all the same, just a question of little spacing. And where do you think you're going? Back to, you ain't going nowhere. You're going nowhere. From nowhere to now here to nowhere, it's all the same. The only thing you can do with your life is give it away. When people say to me, what is it that I can do with my life? What is my purpose? My answer is always the same. Find a way to be of service. Find a way, whatever it is. Doesn't matter if you're serving ice cream cones in Alaska. It doesn't matter if you're raising horses in Montana. It doesn't make any difference. I had a woman come to me one time who wanted to adopt a child in Moldova. I had to look it up. Moldova. She saw this little face on a program on one of the stations there. I think it was on a PBS station. And she couldn't get that face out of her. She became on purpose. She began to live her life on purpose. She went to Moldova and brought home her little son. And it's like, whatever it is, when you are of service, if you're giving your life away, and if you don't know how to do that, you suspend your ego. You understand that living on purpose means there's no accidents. That you're aligning yourself with purpose. You ignore other people when they tell you what you should be doing. That's what Ivan Ilyich didn't do. You just ignore it. You don't have to have a fight about it. You can say, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. It's very helpful. I've never thought of that before. I'll consider that. That's how you handle all conflict. Can I join up with this source energy, or can't I? As soon as you start striking out, you're off of purpose. You have to contemplate yourself surrounded by the conditions you want to produce. That's the first phase of intention. The second face of intention is one of my absolute favorites. I call it the face of kindness. It is my intention to be at peace with everyone in my life, including all of my relatives. That's my intention. I insist that I will be at that place in my life. And so how do you do that? You have to, again, look at the resistance, look at the thoughts, and suggest to yourself, I am going to be kindness. Yesterday, we went to a movie. I came home from the movie, and there was a man on the street in Boston who was homeless. And he was mentally challenged, obviously. And he had a little cup, and he asked for some change. And I looked at him, and I always send a sort of a silent blessing to these people. And then I was walking, and I kept thinking, you're giving a talk tomorrow about kindness. And I went back, and I had about $4 worth of change in my pocket, and I had to chase him. He went downstairs someplace, and he was dirty, and he was, and he couldn't speak right. And I took this change, and I just took his cup, and I put it, and you'd have thought that I had given this man, $1 million. I mean, he followed me. He couldn't stop thanking. Tears were coming down. It's a simple little act of kindness. And I'm not suggesting to every single one of you that everybody who asks you for money, you are obliged to give them money. But can you give them a silent blessing? Can you give them a smile instead of using them as a reason to be upset? And you have to, folks, you got to do this with all of your relatives as well, particularly your own children and your own parents. You got to look at them and see every time that I have a thought that is not one of kindness, what I am doing is I am leaving the source and taking on ego consciousness. Here's a fascinating piece of research. You know what serotonin is? Serotonin is like this neurotransmitter, this enzyme in the body, in the brain. And the more of it that you have, the better you feel. It's the well-being feeling. And this well-being feeling is something that antidepressants are designed to stimulate. So that when you take these names that have become common out there, we associate this with, they are designed to stimulate the production of serotonin. Serotonin is very difficult to measure. It's done through the metabolites in the urine, but they're getting better at measuring it. Here's a fascinating study that was just completed. That any person who is the recipient of an act of kindness has their serotonin levels increased just because they received an act of kindness. And their immune system is strengthened because they received this dose of kindness. That's the recipient. And secondly, any person who is the giver, the provider of an act of kindness, anything you ever do which is providing an act of kindness, and here's a universal source that can't be anything other than what it is. It can't be something foreign to itself. So it's always creating, it is always creating what it creates, treating it with kindness. Here, this source can create worlds. It creates planets and systems. And whether you look through the microscope or whether you look through the telescope, it's impossible to say which has the grander view. It's impossible to say because they all lead to infinity. And this is a source that creates worlds. It creates you. Why would it create? It can create anything. Why would it create stuff that it's not kindly toward? Like avocados? No thanks. I don't want an avocado. Why would it do that? It doesn't have to. It can create anything, this source, from which all emanates. If you are the provider of an act of kindness towards anyone, but particularly towards the people that you're close to in your life, and particularly towards strangers, with just a smile or an act of kindness, or, you know, I can afford a quarter, I can afford $1, I'm going to go back. And just, you know, and not making a big deal about it, the serotonin levels in you are increased to the same degree that they are in the receiver. And so is your immune system strengthened. You want to strengthen your immune system? Be kind. But even more dramatic than that, I get excited about this. Because this is what blows me away about it, is that the observer of an act of kindness, has their serotonin levels and their immune system strengthened just because they're in the energy field of someone who is displaying kindness. When you see someone being kind to another person, it's like a dose of an antidepressant. It's like a serotonin rush. Very often in my talks, and I'll ask, who is the person out there in the audience who had someone buy your ticket because you couldn't afford it, and you couldn't afford to come here, and they paid your way to get here, and they just wanted you to be here because they felt it was so important that you be there? And someone will always raise their hand. I'll bring them up, and I'll say, so what did they spend? And they'll say, $100. They gave me $100, and they couldn't even afford it themselves. And I'll reach in my pocket, and I'll hand her the $100, and I'll say, could I extend to you this kindness back so that you can repay that person? And everyone, you can see teeth that you couldn't see for the previous hour. Everybody is smiling and laughing and happy and excited, and it cost me $100. You know how much antidepressant you'd have to take? That's $10,000 worth of pills, and you got to call your doctor. Do I need the purple one? I want to get some clams. I don't know if I'm going to get them. Every act of kindness. Let me share with you a story. It's a story that I included in The Power of Intention. It's a story that I want to share here with you today. It is one of the most beautiful, and it's a true story as well. It goes like this. I call it the Shia story. In Brooklyn, New York, this is titled, Where is God's Perfection? In Brooklyn, New York, CHUSH, C-H-U-S-H, CHUSH is a school that caters to learning disabled children. Some children remain in CHUSH for their entire school career, while others can be mainstreamed into conventional schools. At a CHUSH fundraising event, a dinner, the father of a CHUSH child delivered a speech that would never be forgotten by all who attended. After extolling the school and its dedicated staff, he cried out, "Where is the perfection in my son Shia? Everything God does is done with perfection, but my child cannot remember facts and figures as other children do. Where is God's perfection here?" The audience was shocked by the question and pained by the father's anguish and stilled by the piercing query. "I believe," the father answered, "that when God brings a child like Shia into the world, the perfection that he seeks is in the way people react to this child." He then told the following story about his son Shia. One afternoon, Shia and his father walked past a park where some boys Shia knew were playing baseball. Shia asked his father, "Do you think they'll let me play?" Shia's father knew that his son was not at all athletic and that most boys wouldn't even want him on their team, but Shia's father understood that if his son was chosen to play, it would give him a sense of belonging. And as you know, Maslow's highest level of consciousness is on that pyramid is a feeling of belonging. And Shia never felt that way. Shia's father approached one of the boys on the field and asked if Shia could play. The boy looked around for some guidance from his teammates, and getting none, he took matters into his own hands, and he said, "Well, we're losing by 6 runs, and the game is in the 8th inning. I guess he can be on our team, and we'll try to put him up to bat in the 9th inning." Shia's father was ecstatic as Shia smiled broadly. Shia was told to put on a glove and go out to play in center field. In the bottom of the 8th inning, Shia's team scored a few runs, but they were still behind by 3. In the bottom of the 9th inning, Shia's team scored again, and now with 2 outs and the bases loaded, Shia was scheduled to be up with the potential winning run on base. Would the team actually let Shia bat at this juncture of the game and give away their chance to win? Surprisingly, Shia was given the bat. Everyone knew that it was all but impossible because Shia didn't even know how to hold a bat, let alone hit with it. However, as Shia stepped up to the plate, the pitcher moved in a few steps so he could lob the ball in softly so that Shia would at least be able to make contact with the ball. The first pitch came in, Shia swung clumsily and he missed. And then one of Shia's teammates came up out of the dugout, and together he and Shia held the bat and faced the opposing pitcher, waiting for the next pitch, the two of them. The pitcher again took in a few more steps toward Shia so he could toss the ball even more softly. And as the pitch came in, Shia and his teammate together swung the bat, and together they hit a slow ground ball to the pitcher. The pitcher picked up the soft grounder and could easily have thrown the ball to the first baseman. Shia would have been out, and that would have ended the game. But instead, the pitcher took the ball and threw it on a high arc to right field, far beyond the reach of the first baseman. Everyone started yelling, "Shia, Shia, run to first, run to first." Never in his life had Shia run to first. He scampered down the baseline, wide-eyed and startled. By the time he reached first base, the right fielder had the ball, and he could have thrown the ball to the second baseman, who would tag out Shia, who was still running. But the right fielder understood what the pitcher's intentions were. So he threw the ball high and far over the third baseman's head. Everyone yelled, "Run to second, Shia, run to second." Shia ran toward second base as the runners ahead of him deliriously circled the bases toward home. As Shia reached second base, the opposing shortstop ran up to him, turned him in the direction of third base, and shouted, "Run to third, Shia, run to third." As Shia rounded third, the boys from both teams ran behind him screaming, "Shia, Shia, run home, run home." Shia ran home, stepped on home plate, and all 18 boys lifted him on their shoulders and made him the hero as he had just hit a grand slam and won the game for his team. That day, said his father, now with soft tears rolling down his face, those 18 boys reached their level of God's perfection. Is that a beautiful story? It always touches me. Creativity, kindness, the first two faces of intention. The third face of intention is called simply love. My friend Leo Buscaglia, you remember Leo? Leo, who wrote a book about love and who did many things for public television. 2 days before he died, he wrote me a beautiful letter, and he said, "Wayne, just keep doing what you're doing. You're on the right path." And he said, "The sun is always shining behind the clouds. Stay connected." That was from my friend Leo Buscaglia, who I hardly knew, but he wrote about love, and he talked about it on PBS, many, many years ago, decades ago now. My intention, and I wrote a chapter on this, is called, "It is my intention to respect myself at all times." Your view of the world really depends upon how much you respect yourself. How much love do you have for yourself? When you trust in yourself, you're trusting in the same wisdom that created you. When you fail to trust in yourself, when you fail to love yourself, you are denying your own divinity and therefore attracting the exact opposite of what this source is. This is a source of love. It is a source of great respect. It doesn't create anything that it doesn't have a loving feeling toward. If you don't have that feeling of love toward yourself, you can't extend it outward, for who can give away what they don't have for themselves? Who can do that? I've often used the metaphor of an orange. If you squeeze an orange, you get out of it orange juice. Why? It's an orange. That's what's inside. And when you squeeze you, someone puts pressure on you, says something about you that you don't like, and out of you comes anger and hatred and bitterness and tension and fear and anxiety and depression and worry and stress. It's not because of who did the squeezing. It's not because of the instrument they used or the timing. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with what's inside. If you don't have love for yourself, you're not trusting in the wisdom that created you. And the idea of being able to respect yourself at all times, how do you go about doing this? You spend your life in a state of cooperation rather than competition. You see yourself as someone who is love in action. It's one of the things that I have written on my return address when I write someone back. It says that it'll have my name and then the address, and above my name it says love in action. That's what you have to be, love in action. You suggest to yourself and you say these words to yourself: I am whole, I am perfect as I was created. I am whole and I am perfect as I was created. And I came from a source that not only determined the shape of my eye and the shape of my body and the color of my skin and my height, but I came from a source that had a great idea about who I should be as well. And you sense that. And that cannot be fulfilled, it cannot be actualized, it cannot be created if you are not in a state of love. Now, when are you not in a state of love? Whenever you judge another human being, you do not define them with your judgment. You define yourself as someone who needs to judge. If I call you stupid, that does not make you stupid. That makes me a person who has to put labels on other people. And as Søren Kierkegaard, the great Danish theologian, once said, once you label me, you negate me. Match game. Match game. Are my thoughts in harmony with that source from which I emanated? Because, folks, when they are, the right people will show up, and the right events will transpire. And everything that you need in what Carl Jung called synchronicity, that there is almost like what happens when you are in a state of love and not having resistance to that, there is like a collaboration with fate. So judging anybody else just says, I need to judge. It doesn't make them what they are. And all I can say to you, each and every one of you, about love and loving yourself is this: that true nobility is not about being better than anyone else. It's about being better than you used to be. It's about being better than you used to be. All I can say to you up here as I speak to you now at this age, that I'm not better than one person out there watching or one person here in this beautiful theater. But I know for certain that I'm better than I used to be in almost every, not in almost, in every single way that that can be measured. I know that. I know that as a human being, as a writer, as a father, as a grandfather, as whatever it is that I am in my life, I am better than I used to be. Be love. The fourth face of intention is the face of beauty. Here we have a source. Here we have a source that is ultimate truth. It is the source from which you emanated. It's invisible. It's formless. Particles themselves do not create more particles. You need this to create a particle. And here is one of the most beautiful quotes about beauty, written by one of the people who probably knows as much about beauty as anybody. His name was Michelangelo. I don't know if you've ever been to Florence and you've seen David. I mean, just to stand in the same room. I went there to just look at David. I had no idea that David was 18 feet tall. And that I stood there not for 20 minutes. My whole family went traveling all over Florence. I said, come back. I can't leave. I was mesmerized by the beauty. And I always loved what Michelangelo said when they asked him, how could, out of one piece of marble, how could you create something so beautiful? And he said, David was already in there. I just chipped away the excess. David is in you. Beauty is in you. And here's what he said about beauty. He said, every beauty which is seen here below, down here below, by persons of perception, resembles more than anything else that celestial source from which we all come. Isn't that great? Every beauty that we see resembles more than anything else that source. We're talking about source, connecting to source, from which we all come. Do you see beauty? Do you see it more or less in your life? Can you find it in a homeless person urinating on the street? Can you find beauty in a cockroach? As you reach higher levels of consciousness, you begin to see, not only do you see beauty everywhere and in everything, you begin to recognize it as truth. One of my favorite quotes that I wrote about, and years ago I wrote a book called Wisdom of the Ages. And it was a collection of 60 essays. We did a public television special on it, and many of you watched it and contributed to PBS from it. And there was a young man, a Victorian poet in England named John Keats. He died at the age of 24. He wrote thousands of poems, many, many essays, 24. And he said these words, and I wrote an essay about it, but I must confess to you, because I'm better than I used to be, I must confess to you that I didn't really understand this quote until I wrote The Power of Intention, until I put together this program here for you. I didn't really fully grasp it. I get it now. I get it. And it's the last line in a poem called Ode on a Grecian Urn. And the couplet goes like this: beauty is truth. See, this is truth. This is the source from which we all emanate. And we leave when we take on an ego. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. From one of the greatest poets of his time. Your natural state is beauty, joy, tranquility. I want to experience beauty. And you know, the way to get beauty into your life is to say, I only attract it. And I take the path of least resistance. I take the path of least resistance. What's the path of least resistance? The path that says, I am as closely aligned with this energy as it's possible to be. You know, in 1978, I had a wonderful opportunity, one of the great opportunities of my life. I was invited by an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, to come to Vienna in Austria. It was at the time when erroneous zones and pulling your own strings were topping all the charts, and they invited me to come over and lecture to all these presidents. I was 38 years old. and very much in more of an ego mode than I have learned to become in my life. But I was honored to go over there, and I had read a book when I was in college, and I was teaching at a university, and I taught this book. It's called Man's Search for Meaning, and it was written by a man who was a survivor of the Holocaust. His name was Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl decided that he had to survive the Holocaust because he had to tell the story. That was his purpose. We got to Vienna, and I found out that little Wayne Dyer, this little kid who lived in foster homes and worked for everything he ever had in his life, was on the same panel with Viktor Frankl. Man's Search for Meaning. I just sat there in awe. I remember what Rumi once said. He said, "Sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment." Just be in a state of bewilderment. And I was just totally in awe to be sitting in the same room, let alone on the same panel, let alone discussing in front of these presidents with this man who had everything taken away from him. He was a psychiatrist who was taken off to the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And he described how he survived. The Nazis gave him a bowl of soup, which was just hot water with even sometimes bugs floating around in it. And there was a dead fish head for flavor in the soup. That was his meal for the day. And he described the beauty, not the anger, because the anger, and he learned very early that anger and resentment and hatred are low energies that always weaken you. He learned to find beauty in a floating fish head. You've got to be able to find it everywhere. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty. They are one. Find it in as many places as you can. The next face of intention is what I call the face of expansiveness. And the intention that I have for this is, it is my intention to express the genius that I am. I love that Buckminster Fuller once wrote, "Everyone is born a genius, but the process of living de-geniuses you." It does. This source is an expanding source. It's a forming power. You have to be a forming power. You have to be in a state of expansion, a state of seeing yourself in the same way that this universal source sees you. You are a genius. Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. More important than knowledge. He also said something very powerful. He said, all I want to do is to learn to think like God thinks. All the rest is details. It's just details. How much time do you spend in your life on the details? This program is about learning to think, feel, and sound like your source, like source energy. So you have to pay attention within you to all of your inner thoughts that have any doubt in them. Hawkins talks about this in Power versus Force, that everyone that is labeled a genius has something called radical humility. They don't brag about it. They don't talk about how great they are. They just know that they came from a source and they came here to do something. And to me, I mean, I have people that show up in my life who think that because I can get up in front of an audience or because I can sit down and write, that this makes me a genius. And, you know, folks, you know, if my car doesn't start, I open up the hood and I'm looking for on, off. Hoping to find a switch in there. That's just, because otherwise I am completely challenged when it comes to fixing things. And I want it that way. I encourage that, all right? I don't want to be spending my energy fixing screen doors, and I've made that really clear. So I just manifest screen door repairers in my life. The way that you stay with this field of expansion is that you align with the spiritual energy that is really the genius from which you originated. You are a genius. One of the most important things that you can do is look for the genius in others. See it in everyone, in everything that they do, and remind them of that. I have 8 children. Every single one of them is a genius in their own way. Every one of them. One of my daughters is, who you'll be hearing in a few moments, is a genius when it comes to taking the microphone and singing. One of my daughters has such power in her ability to get on a horse and to take little children and to show them how to ride a horse. And she looks with her long, flowing blonde hair when she's out there, and she takes these little children, and she just touches my heart, and it's so powerful. And she knows that this is her purpose. Her purpose has something to do. She can't ever stop thinking about anything that doesn't have something to do with horses. Every paper she ever had to write in school has something to do with that. She's her own little genius. I have a son who is who's a surfer, and who's also made up his own language. He speaks a language that he and a few of his friends can do. And I have a brother, my brother David is the same way. He created a language when we were 13 and 14 years old, and I still speak it today. And nobody else understands anything about it whatsoever. If I say Clodopole Dipica or the Beatty Banal, only my kids will know what I'm talking about. There's not a person in the whole country. My brother Dave watching this, he'll know what I'm talking about. That's a genius. All of my children have this in one form or another. And each and every one of you have that as well. Don't let life de-genius you. You came from a source that creates perfection. This creative source reacts to your belief in shortages with a fulfillment of your belief. So if you believe and know and are certain that you can't attract abundance into your life, but I want to tell you tonight, you tuned in to somebody who knows about abundance. I have always been able to create abundance in my life. When I was a little kid, all the other kids in the places that I lived and so on, and even when we got back at home with my mom, pop bottles. You remember soda pop bottles? You could collect them, little knee-high bottles, and Pepsi-Cola bottles, and Coca-Cola bottles, and 2 cents if you took them back. I was a master at collecting pop bottles. I could manifest a pop bottle just like that. It was just... We used to have furnaces that had coal in them. And I would go along and I would empty people's ashes that they would set out. So just take it out to the alleys. I would go to the grocery store, and because my imagination was always working on abundance, I would carry groceries out for little old ladies. You know what I'm doing today? Right now? Collecting pop bottles. And taking out ashes. And taking out groceries for little old ladies. It's just a bigger stage. See, if I came to this source and said, I don't have enough, this source doesn't know how to react to I don't have enough. This source is an endless supply. It's like the ocean. You can take a 10 million gallon tank to the ocean of abundance, and you can take it out every hour, or you can take a thimble once a year. And the ocean doesn't care. It makes no difference to the ocean, because everything returns to this source. Every time I walk, wherever I go, in fact, it happened to me this morning. I found a dime. A dime? That's like major, a dime. That's 10 pennies. That's 5 bottles. And whenever I bend over, and I notice that it gets a little further away, I bend over and I pick up this coin, and I always say, thank you, God, for this symbol of abundance that always flows into my life. Never once have I ever said, how come only a dime? I need $1,000. Why are you only giving me a dime? It reminds me of a wonderful story of a grandmother who was living in that consciousness, and she was walking along the beach, and she had her little grandson with her, and all of a sudden this huge wave came right out of the ocean, gobbled up, took the son, and he was gone, just disappeared. She got down on her knees, she prayed, oh my God, please send my grandson back. How could this be? This is the worst moment of my life. Please send my grandson back. And all of a sudden another wave came along, and plop, there was her grandson right there next to her feet. And she looked up and she said, he was wearing a hat. The face of abundance is like you have to come to this source not with what is missing, because it doesn't know. There's nothing missing. This source, which is the source of all, doesn't know about what's missing. When you say, please give me what is missing, it'll just reaffirm your belief in things being missing. You have to come to this source by being abundant, by being in a state of gratitude, by being thankful for all that you are and seeing yourself as attracting more and more of that and being willing to give it away. The final face of these faces, the seventh face of intention, is what I call the face of receptivity. It is my intention to attract ideal people and ideal relationships into my life. This universal source is what I call an equal opportunity provider. It knows nothing. It knows nothing about not being receptive. It doesn't show up in you and not in you. It isn't anything that would judge one as better than the other. Are you receptive? Are you receptive to everyone? And you know, this works so well. My secretary and I, Maya, who's sitting up here in the box, who's been with me for 25 years. I can't shake her. As much magic as I try, she just keeps showing up. I couldn't do it without her. And we were leaving for a talk in Chicago, I believe it was, from Florida. And we had 7 boxes of books to take with us on the plane. This was in the days when you could take what you wanted on a plane. And we were scheduled out on one airline that I was a platinum something or other on, and we found out that the flight was canceled. And they had already checked the boxes in, and then well, they sent us to another airline at the other end of the terminal. So we wheel up there, we go up there with the 7 boxes, and she's up there, and this woman's got a scowl on her face at this new airline, and almost as if she was saying, you won't be getting these boxes on this plane. And she was determined that that was not receptive to this idea whatsoever. Now, my way I handle these kinds of things in my life is by every time, if I meet a surly waitress or a surly waiter, or if I meet someone who, when I'm checking into a hotel, is giving me a hard time, to me, this is just a wonderful opportunity to practice the power of intention. Can I be receptive to this person and have them eating out of my hand in no time at all? And it isn't by being phony or artificial. It's by trusting that if I'm receptive to this person, if I'm sending love to this person, if I'm sending kindness, if I am being what my source is, if I am in harmony, in rapport with source energy, then I can create an ally. So my secretary was about to, and I just said, Maya, don't say a word. And I went up to the woman and I just started talking to her, and because I knew, I could just tell by her body language that she was about to tell me, you're only going to be able to take 2 boxes with you for each person, and you're going to have to leave 3 here. But that just wasn't on my agenda whatsoever. And I reached into my briefcase and I took out a book and I signed it. I said, I'd really like you to have this. I appreciate you putting us on your flight. And I started talking to her in this really kind of way, and I said, it's just, we just missed this other flight. I've got to give a talk up here in Chicago. And I extended as much kindness as I possibly could. I was totally receptive and open to her. And by the time this encounter ended, she was asking, don't you have any more boxes? Isn't there something else that you'd like to ship? Do you want to ship one of your kids? We can. And upgraded us to first class, gave us everything that we could possibly have wanted, and it was all because of being receptive to her, having this space of receptivity. When you have receptivity, when you are practicing infinite patience, when you are being the kind of person you wish to attract, you have to want it more for others than you do for yourself. You have to see yourself already as connected to the right person. See yourself from the end. And see yourself as having all of the right people showing up. Act as if they're already here. Because that's what the source is. And they are already here. I'm telling you, when I'm writing and I'm in the space that I'm defining here right now and speaking about right here, when I'm in this space, I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that everybody shows up that I need. And it almost gets to a point where I get befuddled by it, how beautiful and blissfully it works. I'm even befuddled by you all showing up, We just put a little notice out there and said, come to Boston. Please come to Boston. Isn't that a song? And you all did. Thousands of you. Look at you, all over the place. This beautiful place and these lobbies and going all the way up into, there's people up there. You're 1,000 miles away. You're all here. And when I'm writing, my eyes will glance on a book that's been on the bookshelf for 20 years and I haven't looked at, and I'll walk past it and it'll fall. What is that? And I'll pick it up, and it's exactly what I needed. The phone will ring, and the exact right person will show up. When you're in this place of being receptive, kind, loving, beauty, abundance, when you're in this place, the universe conspires with you to create the right people, the right things. It all shows up. It's not your ego. I don't do it. It's called surrender. It's called, in the recovery movement, we call this letting go and letting God. Just letting go. You have a senior partner, if you knew, who walked beside you at all times on this path that you've chosen. You could never have another doubt that this would work. And I'm telling you, you tuned in today on this PBS show to listen to somebody who has believed. Not only do I believe in this and write about it, speak about it, I live it every day of my life. It always works. When I sat down to write this book, The Power of Intention, I had no idea what chapter 2 was going to be when I wrote chapter 1. I only had the quotes that I gave at the beginning of the show from Max Planck and Carlos Castaneda. That's all I had. Chapter 2 unfolded chapter 3, and then one day, the exact second half of the entire book, all of these intentions, it all just flowed, as did this show. It all works in perfect harmony. Back in the 13th century, there was a man who, his name was Francesco. And we named the city of San Francisco for this little monk. He gave up all of his worldly possessions. And he provided us with a message. Remember earlier I said Einstein's observation that all of us, everybody else is concerned with details. All I want to do is learn to think like God. Do you see what he meant now? Can you see that? He wants to think and sound and feel like his source. Well, Francesco, who later became known as St. Francis of Assisi, a place where I've visited many times and feel a very deep and powerful connection. In fact, there was a powerful statue of Francesco next to me during the entire writing of The Power of Intention, and it was carved for me by the ancestors who lived in Assisi right there for me. One day I watched them do the carving for me and feel his presence. I'm telling you, I feel him right now, right here on this stage. And I asked Skyzy, who I talked to you about earlier, if she would just come out, and what she is going to sing to you a cappella is the words of this little man who are, as you listen to the words, I'd like you to remember it is your way of connecting to intention. You can connect with these messages. My beautiful daughter, who I'm honored to have here on the stage with me, come out here, sweetheart. Her name is Sky Dyer. Look at this. You stand. You're so beautiful. Way back. Very good.
Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love. Where there is injury, your pardon, love. And where there's doubt, your faith in you. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there's despair in life, let me bring hope. Where there's darkness, only light. And where there's sadness, ever joy. Oh, Master, grant that I may never seek So much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. Make me a channel of your peace. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, love, in giving of ourselves that we receive, and in dying we are born to eternal life. O Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all my soul. Make me a channel of your peace. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, love, in giving of ourselves that we receive, and in dying we are born to eternal life. Thank you.
The words to that I'd like you to play over and over again. The words to that are very powerful words. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is sadness, joy. It's not a prayer. It's not a religious statement. It is a beautiful technology for teaching us to bring the presence of higher, spiritual, divine, organizing intelligence to the presence of every energy that is not of this source. Every energy of hatred, anger, fear, worry. And we need it in the world more than we've ever needed it before. I'd like to suggest to you that when you learn to connect to intention, as I've been discussing here in this program, that something will happen as you go out into the world. You will find that your presence will do things to other people, even without you being aware of it. When you are at this level, one of the things that happens is you begin to instill calmness. We convince others by our presence, said Walt Whitman. People will feel calmer when they're around you. You ever be in a group of people where you instantly know that when you're around them, it just feels good. You feel better about yourself just for having been in the room with them? That's what will happen. And there's also people who, when you're in the room with them, you want to run away because they bring very low energy. And people say to me, you know, other people are always bringing me down. I'm working with, if you knew what my family was like, if you lived with the people I live with, you wouldn't be saying these kind of things. And I say, low energy people can never bring you down. You have low energy because you hate people for hating you. You get angry at people for being angry at you. You judge people for judging you. You join others in their low energy. What did Sky just say? Make me a channel of your peace. Don't send me peace. Francesco didn't say, I need some peace. I'm short of peace. But this is only peace. It can only provide. Make me a channel of this. Allow me to be this. Your presence, when you connect to intention, to the field of intention, as I've been describing it here today, your presence makes other people feel energized. They want to do more. They want to write. They want to create their music. They want to make Mr. Holland's Opus. It's like who doesn't love that movie? And it isn't because it was such a great movie, which I think it happens to be, but it was because everybody, every one of us has that in Rocky. How many people saw Rocky? Remember Rocky by Sylvester Stallone? And you walk out of there, and you might despise boxing, but you go, there's a Rocky in me. We all feel, you walk out of there, you just feel like, it's like your presence makes others feel connected and uplifted. Your presence makes other people feel purposeful. It inspires them to greatness. And there's also an impact that you have on the consciousness of all of humanity. In Power versus Force, again, Hawkins speaks about what happens to us. What happens to us when here we have in this room probably 1,000 or more people in this beautiful, majestic theater in Boston. Just by your being here, just by watching this program and taking on some of these ideas, you change the energy of the entire planet. Everything is connected to everything else. The Native Americans used to say, no tree has branches so foolish as to fight among themselves. We're all branches on a tree called humanity. What I'd like to do is just do a quick summary now of what I call the Dyer dozen. And this is the 12 points that I have been speaking about and talking about here in this entire program. There are 12 of them. I'm just going to spend a moment or two on each of them. If you want to jot these down while you're watching, I would encourage you to keep track of these 12 ideas, the Dyer dozen, for connecting to intention. 1, want more for others than you want for yourself. Want more for others. Whatever it is that you perceive to be missing, whatever health problems that you may have, whatever addictions you're struggling with, whatever lack of love that you have in your life, whatever lack of peace that you have with your aunts and your uncles or your parents or your in-laws, want the peace that you seek for yourself more for them. Want it more for them. That is how we create this level of consciousness. Secondly, think from the end. Begin to see yourself surrounded by the people and the events and the things that you would like to have. Only see yourself. You're having a problem with an addiction, see yourself as addiction-free. See yourself, if there's a car that you want. My son was perfect at this, Sans. I mean, he's just so good at this. Because there's a certain car that he wanted. It's yellow. And he didn't just bug me about it every day, which they all do. And all kids will do that. But he saw himself. He got a picture of it. He put it on his computer. It's the background of his computer, this yellow whatever it is. All right? I call it the school bus. I told him I was going to put cab fares on the side of it, but that's what he wanted. Huh? And then he saw him, and then he went down and he drove it. And it was a used car, and he got on the internet, and he just saw himself in it. He couldn't not see himself in it. You know, we call this just persistence and being a pain in the rear end oftentimes, but it's not that at all. What it is young people have this instant knowing and awareness that I can create what I want for myself in my life, and the way that I do it is I act as if it's already here. And almost like they won't be denied it. That's what intention is. It's not that pit bull attitude, it's that awareness that I am thinking from the end. It's already here, because everything that you think is missing from your life is already here. The third of these dozen is to be an appreciator in your life. Be an appreciator. Look for that which is valuable rather than worthless. Look, you go out and you buy a house, and 10 years later we say it appreciates in value. What does that mean? What does it mean that a house appreciates? It is more what? Valuable. It's more valuable. Same thing with you. If you're an appreciator, you have more value. Now you buy a car, you drive it off of the lot, and they say, well, it just depreciated by 20%. What does that mean? It is not as valuable as it was before. When you depreciate, you take your value away. When you appreciate, you make yourself valuable. What could be more valuable than being connected to Source? 4, stay in rapport with Source energy. Stay in rapport. Your job here is to be in a state of harmony with this. Constantly reminding yourself, is this how my Source thinks? 5, resistance. Understand this about resistance. Every thought that you have that is other than that which you emanated from is resistance. Every unkind thought, every uncreative thought, every thought of judgment, every thought of fear, every thought of depression, every thought of it can't happen, all resistance. So if you say, well, easy for him, he can talk about this, but I can't, that's resistance. You're right, absolutely. Even if you think all of this is a bunch of nonsense, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely, because for you, that's what you believe. And if you believe that, the universal Source will help you to fulfill that belief. 6th is what I talked about many times in the program. Contemplate yourself as surrounded by the conditions which you want to produce. Contemplate yourself that, because the way you are one with Source. You are always one with Source. You are one with all of its principles, all of those phases. You are one with it. It can't be anything other than it is. Neither can you. 7, understand the art of allowing. Allowing means taking the path of least resistance. Every time you have a thought that has resistance in it, what you have done is you have created an absence of allowing. You have to almost think like, here I am here, and here's Source. How much energy can I pull from it? How much energy can I pull from it? Are you pulling energy from Source, or are you away from it? Allowing. Allow yourself. 8, practice radical humility. You are not this body that you are in. You are not this mind that you are in. You are not any of the possessions that you have. You are a divine Source. 9, be in a constant state of gratitude. Be grateful for everything that shows up. Everything. Stay in a state of being generous and grateful in your life. Because what could be more generous than that which has allowed you to come from the infinite Source to this material world and back? 10, keep in mind that you can never resolve a problem by condemning it. Any problem that you have, when you use shame, you are using the lowest energy that's out there in the universe. You cannot shame your way into higher consciousness, into Source energy. 11, play the match game. Play the match game. Always ask yourself, am I matched up with the field of intention? And finally, meditate. Make it a practice in your life. Meditation is essential because it is your way of staying connected to Source. What is the only thing in the universe that can't be divided? You cannot divide God. Everything else has an up, down, north, south, east, west, male, female, right, wrong, black, white, alive, dead. Everything comes in dichotomies, except for silence. Silence, you cut it in half, what do you get? More silence. Cut it in half again, more silence. Cut Source in half, just more Source. You can't divide it. Meditation, stay in the gap. I'd like to close out this program on the power of intention with a story that was sent to me by my dear friend, Ellen. It's called Attitude. A 92-year-old, petite, well-poised, and proud lady who's fully dressed each morning by 8 o'clock, 92 years old, with her hair fashionably coiffed and makeup perfectly applied, even though she's legally blind and moved to a nursing home today. Her husband of 70 years recently passed away, making the move necessary. After many hours of waiting patiently in the lobby of this nursing home, she smiled sweetly when she told her room was now ready. As she maneuvered her walker to the elevator, I provided a visual description of her tiny room, including the eyelet sheets that had been hung on the window. "I love it," she stated, with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old, having just been presented with a new puppy. "But Mrs. Jones, you haven't even seen the room yet. Just wait." "That doesn't have anything to do with it," she said. "Happiness is something you decide on ahead of time. Whether I like my room or not doesn't depend on how the furniture is arranged. It's how I arrange my mind." When you change the way you look at things, even if you're legally blind, the things you look at change. God bless you, and thank you.
Next, a special bonus segment. For the first time in 20 years, Dr. Dyer speaks about the profound and very personal event that transformed his own life.
One of the most important ideas that I've ever encountered came from something I read in Castaneda's very last book called The Active Side of Infinity. In The Power of Intention, I wrote an entire chapter on you and your role with infinity. What he said in here that made such a profound impact on me was that he said the problem with humanity, with what people in the Western world who are not living of the source, is that we are all in bodies that are going to die, but we act as if they're not. And I thought about that, I've contemplated that whole idea a long time, and he said, when you act as if you're in a body that is not going to die, you live on what he called the inactive side of infinity. And our objective here in connecting to intention is to move ourselves to the active side of infinity. The active side of infinity is the place where we recognize our infinite nature. And so we understand what Jesus meant when he spoke of you are in this world, but you're not of this world. And almost all of us believe that we are in this world and that we are of this world as well. And we can't get past that idea. So that to move and understand our infinite nature is one of the more complicated and difficult things to do, but once you get it, you get it. I remember when I was living out in Mount Clemens, Michigan, at the home of a beautiful lady who took in children who were in the same kinds of conditions that I was in and that my mom was in. I was born in 1940. My mother had 3 boys under the age of 4. I was the youngest. And my father, when I was about 1.5 or 2, just left. And my mother divorced him, but he never, he had 3 boys, and he never made a phone call, ever, in his entire life. Never made any attempt to contact or pay any support. And I used to always wonder about how could someone, and my mother was one of these really beautiful, divine souls. I mean, everybody, when I was going, she got us back together when I was 9 years old, 1949. And all of my friends always wanted to come to our house because our house was the place where there was no judgment, it was fun, we always had a good time, there was always something to eat for everybody. And particularly, it was a happy, exciting, beautiful place. And I always wondered about how could a man leave a woman with 3 boys under the age of 4 when he was perfectly capable of staying and working. There was a war going on at that time and so on. And he spent quite a few years of his life in prison. And, and I had this gnawing internal kind of desire to meet this man and to find him and used to dream about him. I was filled with anger about him and so on. And the turning point in my life came when I shifted my perceptions about my father. My father, all I knew was his name. His name was Melvin Lyle Dyer. I knew he was born in 1914. I used to go to sleep at night and dream about meeting him. I used to wake up filled with anger, sweating sometimes. I would have these dreams where I would fight with him in my sleep. And I'd wake up just soaking wet, filled with anger. And in all of those years, up until I was 34 years old, in 1974, I dreamt about him almost every single night. And I always would ask my mother to see if she could tell me something about him. Where was he? What she never wanted to, she's just filled with rage towards this man. So I got a note in 1974 or 73 informing me that my father, this was from a cousin that I didn't know I had. Her name was Dorothy Phillips. And she told me that my father had died 10 years before, 1964, at the age of 49, of cirrhosis of the liver. And that he was buried in Biloxi, Mississippi, and that he died in New Orleans. And that's all the information that she had. Well, my two brothers never wanted to hear a word about my father, I think partly because they remembered him. They were a year and 2 years older than me, and they didn't want any part of it. I had this sort of very innate kind of powerful inquisitiveness about who was this person. And more than anything, I wanted to know how could he do it? And did he acknowledge that he had 3 sons? Actually, I just wanted to know if he acknowledged that he had a son named Wayne. And I was teaching at that time. I was a professor at St. John's University in New York. I was teaching counseling psychology. And that was the time of a lot of the things that Lyndon Johnson had put into effect called the Great Society, and they were integrating some of the southern schools and so on. And I was given a job with the federal government, a temporary job, to just a part-time thing to go along with my professorship. I was to fly down to a place in Mississippi called the Mississippi State College for Women in Columbus, Mississippi. And I thought to myself, I had just found out recently, I don't even know exactly how far back it had been, but I'd found out that my father had died. And I looked on a map and I saw that Columbus was only 200 miles from Biloxi, and I knew that my father's body had been shipped as an indigent from New Orleans to Biloxi. So I got down to Columbus, and I sat in on classes and I wrote up my report on the civil rights laws and whether they were being honored and so on. And then I rented a car, and it was a Friday afternoon. And the car that I rented was a 1974 Dodge Coronet. It was blue. And in those days, they only had the lap belts. They didn't have the shoulder belts, the shoulder harness. So this car, as weird as this all sounds, and my life at that time was really shaky. I was drinking. I wasn't in a good kind of relationship I wanted to be in. My writing wasn't, I just couldn't seem to put it all together. I was overweight. I had very little discipline, and I was very much ego involved in my life. And, but I always knew I had a different kind of a destiny, and I just couldn't seem to get, and this stuff with my father was always there, this internal kind of rage. And so I got in this car, and the car was at an Avis rent-a-car place, and nobody had ever rented the car before. Nobody had ever driven the car before. It had 0 miles on the odometer, like 0.6 or something. It had been trucked in that day to be rented by me. So I rented this car. I got in, and I went to put on the seatbelt, and I put the left belt on, and then I reached under to get the right belt, and there was no right-hand belt. Now, I was a fanatic about wearing seat belts and so on. So I got out of the car and I wanted to find this belt. And I took the seat out and I put it on the ground. And there, taped to the floorboard of the car, was a plastic, wrapped in plastic, was the buckle. And there was a rubber band around it, and the whole thing with masking tape was taped to the floorboard of the car, I guess to protect it from cutting the upholstery or whatever. So I took the stuff out, I took the rubber band off, I got the whole thing out, I put it up, put the seat in, reached in to put the buckle on, and inside of the buckle, there's a business card in this brand new car. And I looked at the card and it said, Candlelight Inn, Biloxi, Mississippi. And on the back, there was a map imprinted on how to get to this Candlelight Inn. And I just had one of those flashing kinds of strange moments and said, that's weird. But I didn't think any more about it. I just put it in, I said, somebody at the factory, whatever it is, and I put it in my pocket. I said, but I'm going to Biloxi. So I drove to Biloxi. It was a Friday afternoon, and at the end of August, and I pulled into the outskirts of Biloxi. Welcome to Biloxi. And I pulled over, and there was a gas station there. I drove into the gas station. There was a telephone with a yellow pages, and I went and looked up cemeteries. It's the only clue I had. And there were 3 listings, 2 very large listings and 1 real small minor listing. So I called the 2. There was no answer at the first. Nobody answered at the cemetery. Second one I called was busy. So I called this tiny little number, and this man came on. And I said, and he had a southern drawl, and I said, I'm calling to find out if there's a Melvin Lyle Dyer who died in 1964. I believe that was the exact date. And would he be buried at your cemetery? And he said, well, this isn't really a cemetery, but they do bury people here. He said, I'll check. And he was gone for at least 10 minutes. And he came back, and he was rifling through Coca-Cola boxes that they had brought Coca-Cola, and this is how they filed things in Mississippi in those days. And he said, I found your father's record. He was buried here in 1964. I said, well, I'm on a journey as my father. I've been searching for my father for my whole life. I would just like to go to, where he's buried. He said, well, it's not really a funeral home. He said, your father is buried on the grounds of the Candlelight Inn. It's a true story. So I reached in my pocket, and I said, I've got a map. And I drove to this little place. This was like the turning point in my life, and when I began to believe in the active side of infinity. And I went to this little marker on the ground. There wasn't even a gravestone there, just a little marker. And it said Melvin Lyle Dyer. I'm not exactly sure of these dates, but I'm pretty sure it's 1914, 1964. And I stood there, and when I went in, the man said, well, he said, you can leave. When you do, just put the chain up over the fence and over the driveway with it. And I said, okay. And I was there, it was about 5:15 or so, and I stayed there for almost 3 hours. It was dark now, it was 8 o'clock. And I just cursed at my father. And I just stomped on the ground, and I just said, how could you have done this? And what was in your mind? And how could you just leave, and why didn't you ever call? And it was like this tearful, very powerful turning point, peak experience in my life. And then something came over me, and I remember what Mark Twain said about forgiveness. He said, forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. And something came over me that had never come over me before, and I said to my father, I forgive you. I don't know why. I said, from this moment on, for the rest of my life, I will send you love. I will only see you in a loving light. And I put the chain up, I drove out, and I went home. I flew back up to New York, took a very brief sabbatical of about 2 weeks, and I went down to a place in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, called the Spindrift Motel. I checked in, and I wrote a book called Your Erroneous Zones. Today, there are 32 million copies of that book in 48 languages. And I wrote it in less than 2 weeks, beginning to end. When I left there, I started running. And I started a running streak shortly after that that went for 22 years without missing a day, 8 miles every day. I quit drinking. I entered into a different kind of a relationship in my life. The children that I had been wanting to began to show up in my life. I changed my diet around. I stopped eating toxic foods and behaving in toxic ways. And everything that I have been able to create and accomplish in my life came about because of some mysterious way that a business card got put into a car that had never been driven and ended up in my shirt when I was going to the place where I was trying to find my father. I could never begin to explain all of that. It is all so mystically mysterious. But that act literally changed my life and turned my life around. And I can remember as a young boy living at 231 Town Hall Road at Mrs. Scarf's house. And she came out one afternoon and she handed my brother Dave a banana and she handed myself a banana, and we were sitting on the back porch, and she said, with tears strolling down her face, "Mr. Scarf died this morning." And I, in my innocence, I was maybe 6 or 7, I said, "When will he be back?" And she said, "Never." And I remember peeling that banana and going up onto the bunk and lying there and trying to contemplate never. I don't know if you've ever done that, but going to sleep and dying for 1,000,000 years is not a big deal. But never, never, and that was when I began to see my infinite nature and began to live on that active side of infinity. Today, with what happened with my father, that act of forgiveness was the most important and powerful tool that really propelled me into the purpose that I'm here for and allowed me to intend this program and the book that I have written and all of the other things that have been accomplishments in my life, including my children, including everything that I hold to be dear, including my health, including my ability to speak without notes, including my voice. All of it came about because of that act of forgiveness and living my life from that moment on the active side of infinity. I no longer live in a body that I believe is not going to die. I know it will, but I also know that it's not me. I am totally, completely at peace with that I am not this body. I am an infinite being disguised as the man who's speaking to you now. God bless you. Thanks.